It's bad enough you get hit twice in a stint, but being hit twice by two cars from the same team, he must have thinking, oh, they've really got it in for me, Chris.
They're definitely not Wolverhampton Wanderers fans, are they?
Well, I only know one.
Well, yeah, she lives close to you,
yes.
Susie Perry. Yes, indeed.
So, hello, Susie. You're the only Wanderers fan that I know, but I know you certainly are a very strong supporter.
Yeah, no question at all, and I'm sure she is wide awake. She may well be tuned in. This has got rather more wheels than she's used to working with, but nevertheless, Susie is a big motorsport fan. Well, let's take a look at some of the action that we've seen so far in 19 hours of racing. Good weather for the start of the Le Mans 24-hour virtual, and a packed field of 30 LMP2 cars and 20 GTEs led away by pole sitter Tom Dillman. He got a flying start for the number 4 team of Baicoles, but unfortunately it was a little too much of a flyer. Pole sitter in GTE led for Porsche. Early incidents bringing out or forcing teams into the pit lane. That incident for Fernando Alonso's number 14 car not only cost them damage but would also earn them a penalty, and that would come back and bite them later on. Baicoles working their way back up the order after serving a drive-through penalty for jumping the start, and then problems for this man, Simon Pagenaud, Indy 500 winner. His car went off at Arnage because his steering froze. On the right-hand side in the picture there, you could see his own rig. He had borrowed a spare sim rig, and he plugged that in. We had a server crash that brought out a red flag for just under 30 minutes in the first 8 hours of racing. But aside from that, when the field got back underway, we have had no technical problems with the game at all. And by the way, that server crash allowed Fernando Alonso's car to be reinstated back into the race after a foible in the software had not permitted Fernando to refuel the car during a pit stop when he needed the fuel. Lots of incidents out on the racetrack, particularly in the busy traffic. And with the reliability of the car being 100% in these races, unless the driver intervenes, the traffic does not thin out at any stage. From lap 3, the quick cars in LMP2 have been in traffic, and so it remains. Car number 20 for the Red Line Racing team, one of our strong pre-race favourites, battling with the number 4 Baicoles car, and the star names from the real world in the number 20 car, Max Verstappen and Lando Norris. That's a Kirchhoff and Gerger Hutu. Their sim racing teammates were very much painted in as pre-race hopefuls for victory. Unfortunately, that was not to happen for them. Problem for Catherine Legge in the chicane on the Mulsanne Straight. The problem was not so much the spin, but that she rejoined in what she thought was a gap in traffic. Unfortunately, it was occupied by the Romain Grosjean team Corvette, and so that caused damage for both cars and a penalty, the all-female entry from Richard Mille. Still in the hunt as we headed into dust, the number 4 car, the Baicoles team working hard. Problems then for Gator van der Garde, his car, the steering on his rig packing up and putting the car into the wall. That cost them delays. It wouldn't be Le Mans if it wasn't dark. Nighttime, all the drivers say, is a very special time to be racing at Le Mans. Ferrari's front-running car was the number 52 machine, and that was their superstar driver lineup. Charles Leclerc with Antonio Giovinazzi, Enzo Burrito and David Tanitza. Unfortunately, problems for them saw them drop way out of contention, and more problems for the all-pro driver lineup at Penske Racing. Roger Penske's team having little in the way of luck. Penske's first appearance at Le Mans in the modern era. Lots of close racing for the lead between the Rebellion Williams eSports duo. Car number 1 and car number 13 battling in the night and continuing to battle. Veloce eSport in the hunt as well with 2Cs Motorsport and Baicoles. And as ever in the dark, cars and drivers finding it a little more tricky to find their way around the Circuit de la Sarthe. Number 16 was one of the front runners early on. The Veloce eSports 2 car, Norman Nato and Stoffel van Dorn with Eamon Murphy and Tomac Porodic they struck problems as well and dropped out of contention. And after a problem coming into the pit lane out of fuel, waiting 25 minutes stationary, the Signatech Alpine Elf car was finally helped with a push from a friend. Nico Lapierre coming in behind the car and pushing his former team's car up to its garage. Who says there is no love between rivals? Problems for the Mahler Racing team going off, and more problems in traffic. Dramatic moment around 7:30 this morning local time. Big crash, one of the cars losing a wheel in the incident. That's one of the Williams cars spinning as well in the chicane. That replay of that incident. Rebellion's Williams eSport car, blue on blue crash. Losing a rear wing at Indianapolis then means that the car is not quite as stable on the way back to the pits as the Feed Motorsport Corvette driver found. Our race leader in GTE is still the pole-sitting 93 Porsche. Our outright race leader, car number 1 from Rebellion Williams eSport. Martin Haven, Alan Manish and Chris McCarthy watching the action with you in the closing stages. We're into the final 5 hours of the 24 Hours of Le Mans Virtual. This is car number 7, Toyota Gazoo Racing. Expect them in September to be in the hunt for outright victory unless something very bizarre happens. But car number 7, car number 8 here with 3 pro drivers in and only 1 sim driver. Alan McNish, that puts them at a little bit of a deficit in terms of the knowledge of this platform because they don't normally run in LMP2 and they don't have much sim racing experience amongst their drivers. But for the team, it's important, Toyota say, to get their engineers working as engineers, to get their drivers working as drivers together. This is all part of trying to fill in the gap since COTA in February before we go racing again in August at Spa and then in September at Le Mans.
Yeah, clearly when you go to any sort of competition, you want to do as well as possible. And it's not as if they've put together a bunch of also-rans as their driver lineup. You know, we've got some pretty good talent
no,
in there.
indeed.
But admittedly, if you were to absolutely go out 100%, you would want to have a balance, because you have to have 2 FI International grade drivers in there, which means circuit drivers, and then you would balance that off with 2 pros in the sim to bring that understanding of the sim, but also to bring the understanding of Le Mans. And so in that respect, I think that they've looked at it in a slightly different way, in the same way that Penske did.
Yep.
Penske's got all 4 racing drivers, and they said, well, actually, we're representing our racing team, not just necessarily the Penske brand. And they're using it, Toyota are using it as part of that, as you said, to try to bring everything together towards 24 Hours of Le Mans.
Now, on the right-hand side, you are watching a virtual driver change. At the top, Mike Conway has just brought the car into the pits, and he is now logging out of the game. Jose Maria Lopez in his rig in Monaco has been waiting to join in. Look at the stretch there from Conway. Okay, it's not physical in the way that the violence of the real cars would beat up the body, but it beats up the mind, and Conway is really feeling that, isn't he? Jose Maria Lopez is waiting to take over the car. Mike will have set up the fueling. Mike will have set up the tyre change because he's the man in control of the car. The team don't do that for you. And now Pachito is waiting for the fuel to go in. Mike's not yet abandoning the rig, just in case. And now Pachito leaves. Look how tired Mike looks. Not physically, but mentally. And Chris, this is a thing that all the drivers have said. So much of driving a race car is physical. It's about your physical knowledge and all of your experience. So much of driving these cars, in fact, all of driving these cars, is mental. And that's what's the big drain for all of the racers, whether they're sim or pro real racers.
You know, when you are tired, like I could say I would be now, you do feel it physically. And it's something that, from personal experience, when you jump out of a rig, you do feel like you've just done an hour and a half in the car. If you've done an hour and a half in the rig, it's just as demanding. And I think you said this last night, Martin, because you don't have the feel underneath you of the car, you have to make up for that in your mind. So you have to try and feel the car through your mind. So you're doing even more to make up for that. Usually, as Alan would tell us, you can feel the car underneath you, you can react to how the car is responding, but with that you have to almost anticipate what the car is going to do mentally, and you don't get a break, and they're on new tyres every single stint, so they have to push 100% every lap. They don't go through stints where they can go at 80% to save the tyres or 70% to save the tyres. No, they're on new tyres every single time, so they're going to have to be pushing at 100%, which we never usually see in the 24-hour of Le Mans.
I'll say that even when I was racing, we were developing or starting to look at developing our tyres our car on simulators, and they were the big moving platform ones. But to do a day in the sim was much mentally harder than doing a day on the circuit. No question about it. And you had to take more breaks. So, you know, when you're looking at the driver times, there's an overtake coming down. This is a replay coming down into Indianapolis.
Change for 6th position. Pierre Gasly in the blue Veloce eSport car. And he has been passed by Arthur Rougier. So 2 real-world drivers. The Rebellion Williams car up to 6th position.
I do love this camera angle. I know in the real life you're never going to get it because it just sticks into the airflow like a handbrake, but it's a fantastic one to sort of see into the side of the cockpit.
And what I love most about that is not just the reflections in the mirror, not just the rear view camera in the screen, but the gear selectors and all the functions on the steering wheel, dashboard display, they work as well. Look, down to 2nd gear here for the chicane, pulling gears with the right hand up to 3rd, up to 4th, up to 5th down the straight. I love all those details. There's so much real thinking has gone into the look of this game, the reflections of everything in the mirrors, and you know, the logo on the tyre whizzing around, the Michelin logo there with the speed blur, all the correct signage around the track for the event and all of that. I mean, there's so much depth of immersion here. Just want to point out that a couple of laps ago, while we were watching Mike Conway hand over to Jose Maria Lopez, the other Toyota, car number 8, Sebastian Buemi, multiple Le Mans winner, just set the fastest race lap, quicker than any pro sim racer has gone. And this is in a car that the Toyota drivers and the Toyota engineers have no prior knowledge of. 3:25.2 is now the fastest race lap. And again, as we saw a little earlier, without setting one purple sector. The fastest 1st sector, 2nd sector and 3rd sector are all owned by different drivers in different cars and different teams, not by Sebastian Buemi, but he has put together 3 very good sectors which have added up to the fastest lap of the race so far. 307 laps under the wheels of that car. There's just under 5 hours left, so 21 hours of racing done, and it's going faster than it has. And that's all part of the drivers, despite the fatigue, getting more and more dialed in. It's part of the evolution of the track, getting more and more rubbered up, getting quicker and quicker. And it's partly that they are just fine-tuning the setup all the way through, Chris, exactly as they expect to do in the real world in September.
You know, track temperature is going to be going up now as we get to just before 10:15 local time here in Paris. So this is a great time to go out and set a fastest lap, because the track is now going to be in a very good condition. And the drivers, you know, they're all going to be going on to their last stints, possibly. So this is their final chance in the Le Mans 24-hour virtual to go out and have their impact and hopefully impact on getting the team a good result. So when you're in that final stint, Alan, that must make you want to push as hard as you've ever pushed in the race.
You always want to push, but in that one, it's also a tricky one here with running new tyres. Yes, you can. If you're actually in a situation where you've got tyre degradation and you're into your 3rd stint on them, then you've got to be very careful, because the tread depth has dropped down, so therefore you've got the cooling of the front tyre down the straights. So the first attack onto the brake pedal, you've got to have a little bit, I would have said, of patience on it. And in general, though, yeah, you're clearly right now, the circuit is going a little bit faster. Everyone's tuning in. Buemi is there with that 25-2, but only 29 seconds behind him's Lopez. And we saw what Jose Maria Lopez was able to do last night when he dragged the Toyota up into a podium position at one point. So I'm really looking forward to this inter-team Toyota battle.
Yeah, but Cheeto is very experienced on esports. He's done it for years now. He has done a lot of racing in the Neo Endurance Championship. So Cheeto, no stranger to this, and he would have been so excited for this event and was bringing all the experience for that Toyota Gazoo racing team.
Yep, but he's 28 seconds behind. That's his teammate up ahead. And you know how that is.
I think everybody who's ever raced anything knows how that is. Yeah, again, you know, it's that old truism. If you can't beat your teammate, you're never going to win the race. That's your first and your biggest rival. And that continues to be as true as it was in 1923. Watching Jose Maria Lopez and watching his car. Cheeto, Argentine driver, three-time World Touring Car Champion with Citroen Racing. Now with Toyota Gazoo Racing. Left touring cars when he was on a real high. He got an invitation to join the Toyota team, and at the time he said, I've got to take this. Sometimes the train only calls into the station once. If I don't take this opportunity, even though it's really stretching myself and my boundaries, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I don't think he's regretting it now, but early on in his career, it was a steep uphill climb for Pacheco really to find the pace in these hugely complex LMP1 hybrid cars that he would normally be racing.
Yeah, he should have won Le Mans last year. He was within a few hours and had a puncture when comfortably in the lead coming out of Mulsanne, right rear puncture. And that was basically the gift that went to their sister car. Their sister car that's 27.6 seconds up the road at this moment in time.
Well, Toyota have had their fair share of storied races at Le Mans. And of all the race finishes at Le Mans, 2016 will probably be the one that goes down as the ultimate, as they would say in France, déception, disappointment is far too soft a word for it. The crushing, just crushing blow of the car retiring from the lead with one lap of the race remaining. Let's hope that we don't have any of that drama here. We've had plenty of very good close racing. Battle stretching out a little bit, but at the moment, still the battle for sixth looks like it is well alive. It's only 1.3 seconds between the number 3 Williams Rebellion car and the number 24 machine right behind. So who's in 24? It's Pierre Gasly for Veloce Esports. So Artur Rougier we saw passing Gasly down into Indianapolis some 4 or 5 laps ago, but Gasly has lost almost nothing. He's about half a second a lap slower at the moment in terms of pace. Just behind them, Dries van Tor for Team WRT in 8th, Larry Tenforder for TDS Racing in 9th, and Michi Hoyer for one of our home teams, IDEX Sport, who've got one of the 2 sim rigs in our studio here, the other being Cinetec Alpine Elf. And IDEX Sport up in the top 10. Cinetec have not had much luck, losing 25 minutes as the car ran out of fuel coming into the pit lane, has dropped them from potential contention right down the order. More problems for Multimatic Sancho as well. Those of you who were watching the early stages of the race when Andy Priaulx was driving the car, they had a connection problem. The car stopped effectively out on circuit, and Andy then explained to us when son Sebastian took over the same rig in their house that they were, I mean, he tried to explain, but even their mobile phone connection wasn't working particularly well. So it looks like the car has stopped again. It looks like they have continuing problems. And unfortunately, Chris, that's half the driver strength. Father and son on the same rig in the same house. If they've got a connection issue ongoing, then that takes 2 of the drivers out of the rotation. And that not only puts more stress on their already tired sim racing duo, but it also brings up the question of whether Andy and Seb will have done, by the end of the race, the minimum 4 hours that every driver must complete. And that could be an issue for that car as much as the connection issue is currently.
Well, thankfully for them, it happened early in the race.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's still ongoing, so it doesn't look like that problem is going to be fixed anytime soon. Our race leader, Nikodem Wisniewski, is leaving the pit lane, and not on this stop is Jack Aitken going to take the lead. Aitken will stop in another lap. Wisniewski stopping every 10 laps on a lap number with a 9 in it, and Aitken stopping every 10 laps on the round 10s. So every lap with a 0 in, Aitken will be in. He'll be in the next lap. Neither of them being able to find or eke out a fuel advantage over the other. Third place still by Koles. Jesper Pedersen, the Dane, still in that car. And in fourth place, the 2Cs Motorsport, again, Isa bin Abdullah Al Khalifa, continuing in his stints in the car. He's getting his driver time completed. Again, the maximum for any driver in the entire race is a total of 7 hours. The minimum is a total of 4 hours. And what teams have to factor in, Alan McNish, is that we had a 29-minute and 11-point-something second red flag that does not count to driver time. So whoever was in on the sim at that time doesn't count from the moment the red flag started to the moment it was rescinded. So the safety car lap afterwards does, but they've got to take half an hour out of the 24 that they then have to work out who has driven what. So there may be some teams that are currently doing a lot of mental juggling, trying to combine driver time minimum and maximums with when the fuel and the tyres are needed in the car.
Yeah, just quickly looking down, there's only a couple of drivers I think that are close to their maximum. Canapino is one of them in the number 13 car, and also there's, yeah, basically Canapino is the main one. And sorry, Raffaello Marciello in the Ferrari as well. He's done 109 laps actually, so, and Oliver Rowland 108. Those guys have been busy down there, that's for sure. Everybody else is kind of easily in the ballpark in terms of the 7 hour at the moment. So yeah, that's a 7 hour per driver.
Right, I'm going to send you back to the laptop. Who is nowhere near their 4 hour minimum? Go and look at the Prios. No. You've got the laptop. You know how it works. Yeah. We don't even know what the password is to get it to open.
Yeah, I noticed that with the messages in the middle of the night saying what's the password. Yeah, I saw that when I woke up this morning.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, 10 hours after it was sent, you saw it. That's much like most IT help desks then, in fact. So Nikodem Wisniewski held the lead then. Jack Aitken in number 13 Rebellion Williams eSport car did not move into the lead when the number 1 car stopped. And that's the first time this morning, Chris, that has happened. And that means that gradually the number 1 car is creeping away and now has a pit stop buffer. Which means, in the same way, if they get a short drive-through penalty or stop-and-go penalty, they won't lose the lead either. It will be much tighter, and then we'll be back into cycling around through the pit stops. But at the moment, Wisniewski is creeping away enough that he has built in a pit stop buffer. It's not a lap, but it's something. And that's a major milestone. You don't see the other car go in front when you make a pit stop. That's a big step.
You know, that would have been the goal for the team. The engineers would have been saying, look, let's get that pit stop buffer, and that would have given the drivers something to focus on and given them a target to aim for, because, you know, the race is not going to end for another 4.5 hours, so you can't just have your target constantly on going for the race win. You need to set smaller targets, and once you achieve those, then the race win will come with it. And that is a big step in this race, I think, Martin, as you said, for them to have that buffer in case they have to come in for a small bit of damage or a drive-through, like you said. And coming out behind, or coming out in front of the rest of the field will definitely help.
Pierre Fillon, the president of the Automobile Club de l'Ouest, the ACO, that runs Le Mans and governs this World Endurance Championship. He's in the sim rig there from Signatech Alpine Elf. I don't think he's a late substitute, although he has done a bit of racing in his time and drove the real version of our hydrogen-powered car just very recently last week on the Bugatti circuit at Le Mans, but he's just trying the rig for size, while our studio-based drivers aren't in that Signatech car. We're trying to line up Jimmy Broadbent as well. Apparently there must be another queue of buses coming along that Haley's going to push him. I think she'll be a little kinder to Jimmy than Ben and Chris have been. He's had the toughest birthday of his life, I think, in terms of being roasted by on-air commentary teams.
And he's only had 30 minutes of sleep, he tells me as well. So he's running on a very low tank, as Alan definitely feels as well.
Yeah, Alan's had a mere 8 hours. He's definitely 2 hours shy of his normal daily minimum. But you know, he's pressing on through like a good trooper. Still, Williams, Rebellion Williams eSport leading, but now a change. Jesper Pedersen for Bajkoles coming through into second position as Jack Aitken stops. Now, the Bajkoles car is stopping out of sync with the Rebellion Williams duo. It's about 4 or 5 laps away from them in terms of when it needs fuel, so that will change back again. We just documented the fact that the 13 car didn't inherit the lead even for a lap when car number 1 stopped most recently 2 laps ago, and that's a major milestone. And now Bajkoles might be in the hunt. They're certainly in the top 3 at the moment. 4th place, 2Cs Motorsport. 5th place, Panis Racing AAA.
Leader, slow down. Leader, slow down. Cars may not overtake. Cars in front of the leader may complete the lap. We are under red flag. Pit entry is closed. We have an issue with the server. We are under red flag. Leader, slow down and stop before the line. All the other cars are to line up behind the leader. No overtaking. No overtaking.
Eduardo Freitas there, the World Endurance Championship and Le Mans race director, and the man that you saw beside him in the first shot, just sitting back in his chair, Ben Roster-Turner. He is the man who is overseeing Motorsport Games' application of this race, so he is leading the team here on site, and our race leader has stopped, as you do in a red flag, on the grid, waiting for the rest of the field to join him. So, red flag here at the virtual 24 Hours of Le Mans. We had a 29-minute red flag earlier in the race and another red flag now. Now, one of the things that happens in the real world is the race gets stopped for accidents, for damage, for weather. We get red flags for that situation. And what we have had so far is now a second stoppage in the race because of issues with the servers. So the cars are on the grid. But let's take a look at some of the action from the 24 Hours of Le Mans virtual so far. Well, the race started in good weather conditions. The Goodyear blimp overhead at the Circuit de la Sarthe. Semi-rigid airship, technically. Good start from the race leader, Tom Dillman, jumping away from pole position, but a little too ambitious, as it turned out. He would earn a drive-through for that. Our pole sitter in the Porsche domination of qualifying led the GTE field. An early problem for one of our Toyotas spinning off at Indianapolis, and on a busy track contact between one of the GT Porsches and Fernando Alonso's car number 14. That would earn them a pit stop penalty that later caught out the team because they were unable to fuel at the same time that that was applied. Lots of very close racing, and then a problem for Simon Pagenaud. The steering wheel on his rig packed up, but he thoughtfully borrowed one from a friend previously and even rehearsed, swapping it live in stints, so he lost barely a minute before he got going again. After a 29-minute red flag for a server crash, a safety car lap to get everybody back together, and then we went racing once more with the 2Cs Motorsport car out front. And they've been part of the lead equation from the beginning of the race. So too has car number 4. The Bajkoles car dropped to 12th with their early penalty and fought their way back in. In the lead of the GT battle, it's not all been about Porsche. The new Ferraris haven't figured, But the Corvettes, at least one of the Corvettes, has the Romain Grosjean team. Feed Motorsport getting tangled up there in somebody else's accident. And as ever, pit lane very busy here from time to time at Le Mans. One of our front runners, car number 20, the Redline Motorsport car, with Max Verstappen and Lando Norris, the Formula One stars in that team, battling with the number 4 car from Baikonur for podium spots. And as the shadows lengthened and the evening drew on, little mistake by the Baikonur team allowed the number 20 car to have a run. Stoffel Vandoorne was in the action there as well in 3rd place. That was your lead trio, covered by less than 2 car lengths into Indianapolis, the fastest part of the circuit. Fantastic racing. Trouble for Catherine Legge in the all-female Richard Mille team. Spinning at the chicane, no damage, but when she rejoined what she thought was a gap in traffic was not a gap. A big hit for the Romain Grosjean Corvette and a penalty for the Richard Mille all-female crew. Pit stops continuing into the late evening, and still our regular front runners from Rebellion Williams Esport, from 2Cs, from Baikonur and from Veloce were in the hunt into the darkness hours. And for those doing nighttime shifts, a very different way of going racing to in the daytime. Peripheral vision nil, and traffic appearing a lot quicker than you'd expect. The front-running Ferrari, in fact the only Ferrari showing any real pace to challenge anybody else, the 52 car, with Charles Leclerc, the Ferrari Formula One driver, as part of that driver lineup, having problems. More problems for Penske. That one of a couple of teams with United Autosport that's got a full 4 pro race driver lineup. And in the darkness, track limits hard to spot. Resulting accident for the Team Project One art car didn't delay them too much. Lots of battling at the front of the field. This is where the Williams and the number 20 car from Team Redline was still battling ferociously. At this stage, Team Redline very much in the hunt, but that would all go wrong for them during the darkness hours, and they would become the very first retirement from the 24 hours of Le Mans. Number 16, which had run so strongly early on in the race, Veloce Esports 2, Nominato, Stoffel Vandoorne, Eamon Murphy and Thomas Porodic. They too dropped down the order. They're now down in the mid-teens. And then after waiting for 25 minutes out of fuel in the pit lane, the Signatech Alpine team finally received a friendly shove down to their pit box from an old team member, Nico Lapierre, pushing them down to allow them to take fuel as he came in for his stop. Into the morning hours at Le Mans, more drama, more people getting caught up in other people's accidents, and that, unfortunately, is occasionally the fate here at Le Mans. 2 Williams Esports cars making contact, and one losing a wheel. A big incident, and the number 33 2Cs Motorsport car just getting away with it. Feed Motorsport, the driver there having lost the rear wing, unknown to him, I think, in a reversing off at Indianapolis moment, then found out he didn't have downforce as he turned into the Porsche curves. As we went to the red flag, our race leader in GTE, the 93 Porsche, our overall race leader, the number 1 Rebellion Williams Esport car. And that's where we are at the moment. The red flags are out. Race Control and Motorsport Games taking control of this. Eduardo Freitas with no cars moving, taking the opportunity for a little comfort break. And as ever, an espresso, because what else do you feel race control on? I'm Martin Haven, alongside me 3-time Le Mans winner Alan McNish and Chris McCarthy. Chris, first of all, in the real world, we have to deal with weather, we have to deal with tyre and barrier damage. That's the sort of thing that stops the racing. That doesn't happen in the sim world, but as we all know, we've all got computers, we've all got phones. Technology isn't perfect, and electronics do let us down. And for the second time in the race, we've got a red flag for an issue with the server. But to put that in perspective, we've got 200 racers driving 50 cars from 37 different countries. Countries in South and North America, all across Europe, in Japan, in New Zealand. I mean, the connection distances are phenomenal.
you know, not only do we have the 47 drivers that are out on circuit, but then we have the drivers that are also waiting to potentially jump in the car as well. And when we go through the pit stop phases, the server gets very, very busy. And of course, we've also got, you know, lots of people from around the world as well, like you said. So, you know, the server is always going to be under a lot of strain.
Yep.
That's something we have tested on the build-up to this event. Motorsport Games have worked particularly hard on testing that with our test races, and they have, you know, done this procedure before. They have tested this exact procedure, and that is why, you know, when we had this a little bit earlier in the race, things got round smoothly, and we were quickly back up to speed. And I expect the same again. As normal in Le Mans, when you get a red flag, sometimes things are. We've got to get marshals out on track to repair some things. We're basically doing that here, but virtually.
Alan, what are the teams and the drivers who are in the sim rigs going to be doing now? Because you don't just sit there twiddling your thumbs going, oh, it'd be nice if we were still going quickly. Everybody is carrying an issue. No car at this stage with 4 hours or so left is going to be running perfectly. So is this going to be one of the busiest times for the engineers to try and work out what they're going to do next?
There's certainly a point where you'll try to do something. However, there's probably a limited amount in reality that you're going to be in a position to do at this moment. I would say it's exactly as Eduardo Freitas is doing, is taking a breath and actually trying to regroup, because there is still 4 hours and 23 minutes to go. So when we get back racing, it'll be sort of 4 hours and 20 minutes. Some of the drivers and teams will be looking at the driving times, because there are minimums and maximums there. We're talking about the Priaulx, Andy Priaulx and his son Seb. Now, at the moment, they're underneath the minimum times because of problems earlier in the race. They need to get to that, or they will actually not be able to finish this officially this race. So there's a lot of strategy going on more than necessarily setups.
So plenty for the teams and the drivers to think about. And of course, the drivers will have to switch it on again so they can't nod off. Red flag at the Circuit de la Sarthe. You can see Sophia Flörsch there on the top right-hand side of your screen, the German lady driver racing for the Richard Mille Racing team. And all the drivers are doing whatever they need to keep themselves awake, whether it's chatting to the team on the radio, talking about strategy and setup, or catching up on Facebook. I'm not quite sure. Great joy of this race has been the chance to catch up with some real legends of motorsport. And I had a chance earlier to talk to Sir Jackie Stewart. Well, it's a very warm welcome from his home for Sir Jackie Stewart. Sir Jackie, first of all, belated happy birthday.
Thank you very much. I'm dyslexic, you know, so I'm actually 18 years of age yesterday, and I feel every year of my 18.
Well, you're not looking anything remotely approaching an octogenarian, so that's the good news. Jackie Stewart, your racing relationship with the Le Mans 24 Hours. Tell us, when you were racing in Formula One, was Le Mans another different race, or did it have the sort of prestige that it has now?
Well, I've got two Le Mans memories. One was with Formula One, because the French Grand Prix 1 year was run, I think, in 1967 at Le Mans in a short circuit, not the big circuit. Didn't use the Mulsanne Straight, for example. And then, of course, the Le Mans, as we all know it, I drove only once. I qualified in one of the big Fords that I would have driven when Ford beat Ferrari at Le Mans, and that must have been 1966, because I had a big accident at Spa-Francorchamps and was in hospital for 4 or 5 weeks, and therefore missed the Grand Prix, although I did the qualifying. And indeed, I did the qualifying again in, I think, 64. For Colonel Hoare, who ran the Ferrari Almost Works teams out of the United Kingdom. And Graham Hill, Joe Bonnier, for example, were the first and two drivers. And then there was a second team with Innes Ireland and Mike Spence, I think. And I was the reserve driver for both of them. So I qualified both the Ferraris at that time. P1, I think, and a GTO. So my Le Mans experiences are rather thin in a way, but the one time I did Le Mans completely was with the Rover gas turbine car along with Graham Hill. And I think that was 67, I think.
So that was a unique car, wasn't it? It was to prove the technology. What was that like to drive? Because you essentially had a helicopter engine, which was in no way even remotely related to anything you'd ever driven before.
No, it was pretty remarkable, really. I think I think the rev counter was up at 170 per mile. Terribly high revving gas turbine, and a gas turbine doesn't react. You press the gas pedal and you wait for a little while, and then suddenly it takes off. And when you have to brake at the end of the Mulsanne Straight, there's no engine retard, no engine braking, as well as, of course, braking with the pedal, the brace pedal. But it meant that in those days, braking was an art of its own. And certainly with the gas turbine, it meant that you were braking much earlier than you would have been in, let's say, a normal engine car, because when you're going down through the gears, you're retarding as well as the actual brakes. Whereas in the gas turbine, once you took your foot off the gas pedal, there was a second or two when the gas pedal didn't come off. And then there was no retard on the engine. So everything was on the brakes themselves. In fact, Graham Hill ran into the sandbank at Le Mans on the very first lap and damaged the car a little bit. We completed the race, finished the race, but when he hit the sandbank, much of the sand went into the turbine engine and blunted all of the sharp edges of the fans. So we were very slow in the end. I was driving the car at the end of the race, and Jochen Rindt, who's a great friend of mine, passed me every 3 laps. We were going so slowly in the end. And in fact, I was overtaken by a Triumph Spitfire at one point, which did nothing to my reputation. Just was going faster than we could go at that stage in order to finish the race. And we actually finished something like 10th, I think, and we won our so-called class. I don't think it was a gas turbine class, but it was a class. But at least we finished the race.
Well, Le Mans has always had that, hasn't it? Right from the very beginning, it was to prove that automobile technology was safe, that it worked, and it's been at the forefront of introducing these new technologies. We've got a hydrogen-powered car they're looking at for the future, which will be the safety car in our virtual race this weekend. And, of course, disc brakes were proved by Jaguar, which have been so much a part of motoring ever since. So many different things have come from testing them in endurance racing.
Well, an endurance race, a Formula One race is the 100 meters. Le Mans is the marathon. So therefore, the durability is vitally important. To finish first you must finish. And Le Mans was a question of finishing. In Formula One, you were driving at almost 10 tenths most of the time, right on the limit of a Formula One car. And you couldn't do that for 24 hours. And you still can't do it for 24 hours, although many of the drivers would suggest that they are on the limit all the time. But it's not possible, because you've got to finish the race. And it's 24 hours. For any performance to last that long at the speeds involved, because I remember with the big GT40, the 7-litre that I qualified in '66. I was doing 240 miles an hour down the Mulsanne Straight when the gull wing door flew open and the car took off and wasn't flying straight, it was flying at an angle. And luckily the door actually came off eventually. To begin with, it was up, and that's what raised the car off the racetrack. But fortunately, I was going so fast in that car that it finally just destroyed the door. And luckily, I managed to get the car down on 4 wheels, because people like Joe Bonnier later on lost his life at Le Mans with such an incident. And there's been many more big accidents at the Mulsanne Straight when aerodynamics have suddenly disappeared. Mark Webber had a very big accident in a Mercedes, I think, at one point at Le Mans, the 24-hour race. So Le Mans is an endurance race. It has a fantastic weekend. It's a fair. People come from all over to have a good time. There's usually good music. There's usually good food. And if you were racing or driving for Ronnie Hoare, Colonel Hoare, you would be staying in a Michelin, 3-star Michelin or 5-star Michelin, whatever was the top, hotel restaurant, and living in a very fancy way. And I think Le Mans has been there for so long. It's part of the world of motorsports. It wouldn't be right for Le Mans not to be there. I mean, it wouldn't be right for Indianapolis not to be there. There are a few things, like there's got to be a Grand Prix in Britain, because it was the first that ever had Formula One World Championship Grand Prix. And Le Mans and Indianapolis and so forth are just part and parcel of the history of motorsport at the highest level.
Absolutely. And one of the very few places that you get to race in the dark at night, and particularly in your era, it wasn't well illuminated. As a Formula One driver, what challenges did racing at night bring you?
Well, I raced at Sebring as well, but of course it was only a 12-hour race. When it was raining at night, it wasn't fun. Because the cars really, visibility with windscreen wipers really were very important. They either came off with aerodynamics, because in those days, at my period, aerodynamics were pretty primitive. And the early morning sun coming up and the late evening, first of all, light going down, the sun going down, you had to have different, if you were wearing goggles of any kind, you had to strip them in such a way that by the end of the period, you were only probably looking out about this size, because the sun was in your eyes, sometimes very strongly. So I think the race that I did, I don't think it rained at all, actually. But when it's raining, of course, it's even more difficult with the spray. And cars traveling at the kind of speeds that you get in Mulsanne, then the spray, if there's not a strong wind blowing, is carrying on for a very long time to the vehicles and the cars behind. So it has different challenges than any other race, but I think it's such a classic. And I don't get the opportunity very often of going to Le Mans, and I did not too long ago. I think I went with Rolex as a guest, and I enjoyed it very much as a spectator. But of course, many times it was classic with the Indianapolis 500 time in Monaco and leading up to Indy and so forth. So for us, it was in Formula One, it seldom fitted into our calendar. And as I say, the last time I drove there, and the only time I really raced there in the 24 hours, of course, was that VRM Rover, it was called, the gas turbine.
Well, Rover were particularly lucky to have you and Graham Hill with the programme. It was a big technological step for them, and to have two such talented British drivers, of course, that's a very important part of the deal as well for Rover, I'm sure. So, Jackie, great as ever to hear from you. Thank you so much for the time. Our sim racers and our real-world drivers who are racing the computer virtual Le Mans this weekend won't have to deal with anybody whistling by them with a helicopter engine attached. So, at least they have that, and they won't be overtaken.
Well, you know, it's good racing. I mean, it's a good show. I've been watching them, and it's nice to see it, and it's good to see the top drivers performing well at the top, and other drivers don't seem to get quite as much television time, but it should be seen because they're obviously sometimes from other sports and from other parts of life, but have been great enthusiasts. So I'm a big supporter of the system as it's going at the present time, because of course we don't have Formula One right now, and that'll be starting in not too far future. We're going to be in Austria in a few weeks, but without any crowd and without any media to speak of. No paddock club. I can't imagine there'll be a paddock club there because they're keeping it down to a minimum number of people. So motor racing is going through a hard time in a way, as we are in so many other parts of life because of this terrible illness. But I do like to watch Le Mans when it's on.
Well, Jackie, it's as always a great pleasure to talk to you. Our very best to you, and again, belated happy birthday. The card is in the post, and all the very best to Lady Helen and the rest of the family who I know are close around you. So thank you so much indeed. It's always a pleasure.
My pleasure.
As ever, great to talk to one of the motor racing legends, to Jackie Stewart. If nothing else from this weekend, I got a chance to sit down and interview Jackie Stewart and Mario Andretti. That's not a bad Friday in anybody's book, Alan Menez, is it really?
No, no question at all. It was very interesting what Jackie was saying there when he was talking about the turbine car and having no engine braking and driving the simulated H24 hydrogen car, which is something for the future. It's got a similar sort of tendency as well, so you're actually relying on different systems. He was talking about something in the 60s. We're talking about something in the future, but ultimately the story is still exactly the same.
Well, talking about something in the 60s, time to catch up with Andre. Oh, there was a bus coming by. Alan persuaded me to say that. Let's catch up with Hayley Edmonds. She is going to talk to Andre Lotterer. I hope he's feeling a little less tired than he was yesterday evening.
Yes, I'm live with Andre Lotterer, Formula E driver, 3 times winner of the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and he's driving the car number 91, the Porsche Esports team. Andre, firstly, how are you doing? How's this 24 Hour of Le Mans virtual been going for you?
Well, I can tell you it's at least as tired as the real thing, if not more sometimes for the eyes, but I'm doing fine. Unfortunately, we lost a few positions with some bugs. I think at one stage we were looking good in P2, but now I don't really know where we are. No, I mean it's been great. I feel like I'm in Le Mans somehow, and I've been taking this challenge really seriously with practicing, and no, it's amazing how you get caught into it, and we can also feel the love for Le Mans we have here with the different corners, different places, different times of the day. I'm really impressed.
Yeah, so you were saying on social media yesterday how impressed you were with the global kind of production of the event. I mean, what has been the kind of standout for you? What has surprised you the most?
Well, your production, everything you've been doing, the commentary, the way you broadcast the race, and I think also on track. For me, it's the first time I entered the race in the GT class, so I'm managing traffic in a new way, and yeah, the way we play on track, it's fair. So it's really so close to the real thing, and I mean, yeah, everything is as close as possible to the reality, and it's incredible how this feels to somehow be at Le Mans, but then not.
So you've previously participated in rFactor 2 platform games, but I mean, how much has that prepared you for this 24 Hours of Le Mans Virtual?
Well, it helped me a bit. I participated in the Formula E Race at Home Challenge, and we also work a lot with simulators nowadays to prepare the races. I think every race team has a simulator now. It's which is closer to the reality because there's more data involved in those simulators with more tire data and more realistic models. But here in rFactor, yeah, it helped me a little bit, but each car is different, so you always need to get used to every new situation. And Formula E was a very unique one, but here it's a bit a more natural one to drive, so I enjoyed quite a bit. I just need a bit more track time compared to the sim guys, because I think they have definitely the lead on us in this world.
Hey Andre, it's Alan here. Well, last time I was in a sim was the one when we were developing the 2013 car. Now, I can probably relate to that, needing more time in it. But you just keep pushing for the end of this race and keep all your energy. But tell me, how do you find the actual racing side of it? Because that's one of the things I've noticed is when drivers have been coming up to Porsche curves, for example, and running round the outside, is they overtaking the slower traffic the same in the sim as it is actually in real life?
It is almost the exact same thing. The way you manage traffic, the way everything is happening on track, with the way you position yourself, the way you anticipate the traffic is really yeah, you feel like you're managing it the same way. You have to use the same kind of intelligence as the real thing, and you also you can check in the mirror, and you can I see who's coming up, and I start to memorize who's a bit more aggressive than others. So yeah, it's really it's cool, and I think for me back in the days, if I would have done this preparation as a Le Mans rookie, it would have helped me so much more to enter this race for the first time. So I think for anybody or any pro driver that will go to Le Mans for their first time, they should definitely enter the race in this kind of way.
Thank you very much, Andre.
Thank you, Haley. Thank you, Andre Lotterer. And it looks as though the safety car is about ready. Our safety car driver is in his sim rig in the garage. Eduardo Freitas is back in his seat in race control. So it does look as though we are preparing to go green. Martin Haven, Chris McCarthy in the studio. There's Eduardo Freitas in the centre of your picture. At least that's the back of his head. On his right-hand side, Lisa Weikart. On his left, Ben Rossiter-Turner from Motorsport Games. And Chris, this is part of racing online, is that everybody's online. It's not a LAN race where everybody's plugged into the same server in the same room. But even if it were, that can also have problems. But we've got all sorts of technology problems with drivers dotted around the globe, 37 different countries in 6 different continents. And so the connection problems are always a bit of an issue. Looking here at the Multimatic car, now I've just had a little message session with Andy Priaulx. They've had a problem yesterday. They kept getting disconnected from the game because of low internet rate, which basically the game can't sustain, and so it drops them out of the game. Their sim racing teammates raced through the night, and now Andy and Sebastian Priaulx were due to pick up the baton again and run today towards the end of the race. But they've had an issue with their rig, so they are now out of the race. Neither of them has completed the mandatory minimum of 4 hours. So their teammates are going to have to do the rest, which will put them over the maximum of 7 hours. So the team now, to continue in the race, are going to have to go to race control and say, 2 of our drivers are on the same rig and it's broken. So, you know, that's another thing for race control to deal with during this red flag situation while we get the race ready to restart.
It's like like a driver having an injury, isn't it? And saying, look, he physically cannot continue, so the rest of the drivers are just going to have to pick it up.
Except when this driver fell over in the shower, so did one of his teammates in the same shower at the same time, which is possibly not a picture I should have conjured up this early in the morning. But yeah, we had a similar situation a few years ago, in fact, with by college, Naran Kartikeyan, one of their drivers, vaulting over the pit wall, tripped.